So Pat, great to have you again.
As
really
always,
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We loved your presentation actually on the keynote on Monday morning.
Thank you.
I know the feedback was phenomenal, and right after you, Carl came up and talked about the vision with some customer examples. I think
Yes.
you had Ford, MIT, and Medtronic, right?
Yeah,
I got them right?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, Ford and many other customers throughout the show. I mean, just a fabulous outpouring of enthusiasm for the strategy targets. So
Absolutely.
You're on the right track, buddy.
So on that one, the reason I just want to talk about that, Pat, for a second, and I know these fireside chats are very valuable for the folks. By the way, none of this rehearsed. I told you guys about it. It's a completely casual and an open format. Carl and I were talking, and we said the MIT one was really interesting. Ford was interesting, big company, obviously. Medtronic is all healthcare, great story. But Medtronic, the MIT guy was talking about open source, OpenStack, VMware, and it kind of tied to your announcements.
Yes.
So can you talk about a little bit what's going on in that sense? OpenStack, open source, Docker, some of the container work you are working on.
Yeah, and what sort of emerged is there's this perspective that IT, right, has become this sort of stable, mature kind of thing. And if you're a cool, new app developer, you got to go do something different over here. And it's created what we'll call the tyranny of or. I could either be this cool new developer, or I could be that stable, safe, secure IT guy. And what we demonstrated with our announcements this week is that if you're an OpenStack guy, you can run that on that same trusted, virtualized, secure, managed infrastructure. If you're in that new fad and that new excitement of containers, you can develop in that model and run it on the VMware infrastructure as well. And thus, we're giving the power of and as opposed to this perspective of the tyranny of or, right, in that sense. And it's a very exciting set of things. And the response from customers was saying, boy, I don't know, as IT, I didn't know how to go satisfy those line of business guys and some of the development things. Now I can go to them and say, yep, got you covered, right? Go for it. Go do your crazy developer thing, and I can still run it in a safe, secure environment that meets my business and fiduciary responsibilities as well.
What I loved about is the same day after your presentation, I think you were on CNBC. Mm-hmm. It was live. I was watching on my device. And on CNBC, you talked about OpenStack and Docker, and actually CNBC anchor got it. And she started talking about OpenStack and Docker and containers and VMware.
She's been writing code for many years, so it was cool. Melissa, she's really getting into it.
I'm like, Pat made OpenStack sexy. That's unbelievable. I don't know if anybody could do that, but that was fantastic. So a few other announcements, Pat, you made alongside of those themes. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because some of the folks, as you know, just arrived today. They haven't been to the keynote. They heard about this, and in the hallways, people were asking me, Evo, Rail, Rack, the difference, and maybe you can clarify some of those announcements a little bit?
Sure. So we announced a new family of what we call hyper-converged infrastructure. We've seen sort of converged infrastructure, this idea of, now that you have this virtual layer, people don't necessarily want to put the pieces together of servers, networks, and storage. Let's get those pre-integrated together, right? Because the VM layer is what I care about. That's what I'm managing. That's where apps are seeing. So I don't want to be building the Tinker Toys anymore. I want to get that as a solution. What we announced was hyper-converged infrastructure. Now with the full components of software-defined data center, compute, network, storage, and management, that bundle delivered with pre-configured, pre-installed hardware, right, enables us to deliver this hyper-converged where we said that we could have a data center up in 15 minutes or less, right? It's benchmarking at about 12 and a half, not that my engineers aren't out to overachieve, but so 12 and a half minutes, they can have a complete virtual data center up with Evo Rail. And we sort of think of that as this appliance level solution. Think of it for mid-markets, branch offices, and then for the big boys who want to do this at cloud scale, we also did the first tech preview of Evo Rail, which is from 1 to N racks, where within 2 hours, you can have a complete data center up at cloud scale, where we're talking about tens of thousands of VMs being able to operate at that level. And we had a bunch of our hardware partners, and we had Dell and EMC and Supermicro, who I know you have Charles here speaking later as well, and international partners with Fujitsu and Inspur and Net1 in Japan. So a strong set of hardware partners to bring that complete solution to market, because you don't want to go build it yourself anymore. You now want to get this complete solution, and that's what Evo, the first hyper-converged infrastructure solutions in the market, allow.
That's amazing. By the way, just a point, Marius Haas from Dell is over here as well. Marius, where are you? He's, by the way,
Marius, there you go.
He's truly Dutch. He has that shoes not on it. I'm going to get those shoes.
By the way, your Dell team, Marius, was absolutely fabulous. I mean, they've worked like crazy getting it done. They were so excited. I think the only team that worked as hard as my team was your team getting this in the market this week. So thank you, Marius.
Pat, Sam is Marius' CTO hiding there. He comes to a panel at VMworld right after your keynote, and he goes, "We can do that in 9 minutes." On the Dell gear. So you need to talk to Charles about it, who's faster on the one. But to make long story short, Evo Rail and Evo Rack, pretty clear. Obviously, you had new announcements about vSAN, virtual SAN announcement, which we announced also Nexenta as a new product for vSAN running on top of vSAN, extending the vSAN, as we talked about. What's the view on that? What's your vision on that? And how is EMC taking that?
Yeah, so it's part of the whole SDDC vision, right? For which we're going to deliver this layer of software that abstracts all elements of the hardware, right? And hardware is important. The packets need to run somewhere, the VMs need to run somewhere, but increasingly you want to see that through the software layer, right? Software-defined compute, network, storage, right, and all of that, replacing people, because you have to replace manual processes with automation processes if you're going to get this degree of efficiency and scale. That's how all cloud data centers run, with automation. And obviously a leg of that is software-defined storage, right? You can't do 3 of the 4 legs and expect to have a software-defined data center. So we launched our vSAN initiative. Also, we're releasing vVol to enable all of the external storage partners to participate with us as well. And obviously, from EMC's perspective, as a big, largely hardware storage vendor, they're sort of like, now let me talk about that again. How are you going to deliver what I do in hardware, but with you in software? So it's been an interesting discussion. But generally, they're a top-down company. This is generally a bottom-up technology. So at the high end, it's 1 out of 2 is EMC. At the low end, 1 out of 10 is EMC. So they can say, boy, this for us is probably good in most cases, right? And as it grows up and matures, they've also laid out their software-defined storage strategy, because every hardware vendor needs to make that transition to the other side of this fundamental tectonic shift of the industry, that the world is going to a software-driven world. And if all of your value is tied to proprietary hardware and ASICs, that's not part of the future, because all customers want to go to the standardized view of hardware in the future, where the value, intelligence, and agility and business value emerges from the software layer.
And as you said, bringing all those things together again. And tying it obviously to the end user as well. With Sanjay coming on the business now, partnering with Raghu.
Yeah,
we love Sanjay.
He's almost as passionate as you are.
Can I tell something? I get to this with after 10 Turkish coffees. He's like that by default. I know, and actually he was going to be here. He goes, talking, I'm doing a kickoff meeting back in the office. I'm not going to be able to be there. I'm going to text you. So I will repeat what he says during this text. But going back on the Horizon front, you made also some announcements.
Yeah, a couple of things we announced, obviously, and the answer there, when we announced the software-defined data center strategy, we also said that we're going to deliver vCloud, our product suite, bring them all together so that customers aren't needing to install and configure them all. We make the pricing, bundling, and engineering of it as a complete solution. What Sanjay announced was the same for our end user products, because people need to manage their PCs, they need to manage their mobile phones, they need to manage their content, right, across identification services, security models, and bringing all of that into a suite that we call the Workspace Suite. So he announced that. We also announced another acquisition, Cloud Volumes, this week as well, which is a very cool piece of technology that actually allows you to compose applications on the fly, as opposed to necessarily being able to, have to build that whole PC image and then represent it in a virtual desktop. So very cool, right? And the demonstration for that was just fabulous. People kept coming up and saying, was that real? Was that real? Could you do it that fast, where all of a sudden you go from having 0 apps in your virtual desktop to having hundreds of apps, literally in a few seconds? It was quite amazing. By
the way, CEO of Cloud Volumes, Raj Prakash, is going to be here also this afternoon in one of our panels. And actually last year when we were here having this casual conversation, he was actually here talking about Cloud Volumes and so on. And great to see, obviously, those two companies coming together in a big way. One other area, talking about mobile devices, I don't know, everybody saw the news this morning. I know we kind of woke up. here a little bit later than the East Coast, Alibaba is posting some great results. Even though they're not a public company yet, they're acting like they're public. That's the new world, I guess. By the way, there are a lot of private equity firms and investors in the room there, like nodding, yes.
Yeah.
And the announcement was primarily driven by the mobile devices and mobile apps. They're pushing their revenue through, which is in line with what we were talking about. Let's step back in a second for vCloud Air. You talked about a little bit. Bill Fodder's ex-Savis leading that. He's the relentless leader with his beautiful British accent. He always sounds smart, and he's smart with that beautiful accent. And he made a few announcements. Can you tie that? And one last point on this one, Pat, to clarify. In the room and throughout the breakouts, some of the resellers, some of your cloud service providers were thinking, what does that mean to me? Can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure. And first, let's just talk just a little bit about the cloud space generally for a second, because obviously if we think about public cloud services today, you think about Amazon or Microsoft or some of the other players, and how does VMware, how does our strategy fit vis-a-vis what's going on in the space overall? And what we've said is we're trying to do three things in that space. Number one, we're aiming at the enterprise customer. Right, as Jesse James said, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. So why are we going? That's where the money is. It's also where our installed base is. Right, we have 50 million VMs. That's where we sell everything. So we're focused on the enterprise customer because they have higher value needs, security, management, network partitioning. All of those types of things matter to them. So aiming at the enterprise customer. Second, it's about hybrid. Right, for us. Because today, Gartner statistics would indicate that 92% of IT is on-premise and only 8% is off-premise. Right? By 2020, they estimate that 75% is on-premise. Right? So if you look at that, you say, boy, it's a hybrid world where I'm having this mix of on and off-premise environment. And since we have these 50 million VMs on-premise, we're uniquely positioned to deliver this value proposition to allow workloads to move, to have dynamic resources across the two, to enable customers to have more efficiency on-premise with the things they do off-premise. You move a workload to Amazon, you've made your on-premise less efficient. You've become a bifurcated management environment. When you do it with the VMware solution, you improve the efficiency of all the investments you've already made and enhanced it with new capabilities in the cloud. So do it hybrid. And the third piece of our strategy is partner. Right? And we have 3,900 VMware partners as service providers today. A stunning ecosystem of partners because Amazon's not enabling this rich set of partnerships. Right? It just says, give me dumb pipes and I'm ready to go do everything myself. And we're saying, boy, this is going to be a broad and diverse world of service providers, of resellers, right? Of vertical clouds, maybe medical clouds, federal clouds, geographic clouds. We now have clouds in 102 countries based on the VMware technology. So it's enabling that broad set of partnerships. So we announced vCloud Air, right, a new branding of our offering, and the vCloud Air network, these 3,900 partnerships, and a handful of specific announcements, like one was with AT&T, right, bundling their network services in a programmatic way into the vCloud Air offering. I was so excited to get that announcement done, right, working with my buddy Andy Geisey at AT&T, and then he ruined my day by announcing his retirement. Right? So I was on the phone with him this morning, and he's 35 years at AT&T and he's retiring. So Andy, how can you leave me? We just got the deal done. So it's sort of, but he promised it's in good hands and Ralph's careful feedback.
Well, by the way, besides AT&T, you have in the room also some of your key partners. Networld is here, Morita-san, I can see from here, SoftBank, Miyagi-san, obviously you made an announcement. Can you talk about that SoftBank announcement in Japan you did? With,
and we did two announcements in Asia. We did one with China Telecom and the second with SoftBank. And this just emphasizes the partner, enterprise, hybrid, and partner. Because you go to Japan, right? Japanese want to buy from Japanese, right, companies. They have those long-term business relationships, trusted, deep relationships. So a partnership like SoftBank to us is a powerful way to both leverage their networks, their data centers, their sales force, bring the VMware best-in-class technology, right, and bring that as a solution into the marketplace there. So we announced that partnership. It's in beta today, and we'll be going GA on that later in the year. We go to a market like China. Guess what? right? You need special certifications, a special license from the government to be in China. So what did we do? We went to the #1 telco in China, China Telecom. We partnered with them, and they're bringing forward the eCloud hybrid service from China Telecom, right, to the marketplace there. You know, and obviously there's so much tension about, you know, U.S. IT companies in China. You know, the strategy and the answer is very clear. Go to world-class Chinese brands, partner with them. And that's exactly the strategy we took there with China Telecom, just like we did with Savvis CenturyLink here in the U.S. And you'll see us do more of those partnerships at other points around the world.
Super. On that note, also to mention, not only international, but there are a lot of service providers in the room, local. I know ScaleMate is here, Chris Orlando, the founder from San Diego. They do a lot of work with the government. I know Phoenix Snap is here from Arizona, and a few other internationals. And I think what the strategy you're laying out is perfect for them as well. You don't have to be a big service provider.
No, and a lot of the service providers end up, you know, in this game, right? You know, it's not just going to be, you know, some would, pronounce it's going to be 2 clouds or 3 clouds. We think that is absolute bunk. Right, there's going to be, you know, thousands of clouds, right? There's going to be medical clouds, vertical clouds, you know, state and local government clouds, different points around the world, specialization, right? You know, medical data for, you know, proteomics, and, you know, it's going to go on in that sense. And some are going to build on clouds, some are going to differentiate, and our strategy is to enable as many of those as possible using our software, and some will choose to run directly on what we do, but most of them we believe will be this broad ecosystem of partners.
Super. By the way, at the end, we're going to take a couple of questions as well. So think about your questions for Pat, if there are any. There are a few folks with microphones to help you out. Now, moving from technology, Pat, a little bit, you were also on CNBC talking about on the financial side of things a little bit. You just announced you guys are going to slow down on the guidance for odd years. A lot of questions on that.
That's absolutely not the case. That's not what we announced.
So, what was it exactly? Can you cover? Maybe I'm saying it in a different way. So don't write it up yet. So what was this story? Can you clarify that, because that was coming up?
Right, amongst the many things we do, including Nexenta's conference here at VMworld, we also hold our financial analyst day. So we did that. So we had 250 or so financial analysts on Monday. And what we did is, you know, we told them a framework for our guidance for next year, right, which we said was going to be in the mid-teens of growth, which, by the way, you know, as a $6 billion company, mid-teens growth, you know, I feel pretty good about that, right? You know, it's like, right, in this environment. So we feel quite good, and we didn't set a specific guidance range on it. And like all good analysts, some were crazy high, some are crazy low, and some are right in the middle. So if you were in the crazy high, you'd say, they're being conservative on mid-teens. If you were in the crazy low, you'd say, they're being optimistic on the mid-teens. And most of them felt quite comfortable with the guidance that we, you know, or the framework that we set. And we're going to set formal guidance, of course, like most other companies when we finish the year, and we'll set a specific guidance range for the coming year as a result.
Super. So tying to that financial also with partnerships you talked about, VC, we have Praveen Akreju later on one of the panels, dear friend, ex-Cisco, running the virtual computing enterprise, we call it, the environment, we call it
VCE, Virtual Computing Environment.
Also stands for?
VMware Cisco EMC.
Thank you. So on that, not rehearsed, you're doing well. So where does VC go from here? Very open, this is a conversation we obviously talk about. You acquired Nicira, now into the network virtualization, storage virtualization. I'm sure you're getting sometimes calls from Hopkinton, Massachusetts. What are you doing? Why are you doing too much storage virtualization? You answer that question. Where does VC go from here?
Sure, and Praveen will be here to give his perspective on it. But from our perspective, the partnership has been extraordinarily successful. Because in less than 5 years, VCE has created this entire category of converged infrastructure. Because until VCE, everybody was buying servers, buying storage, buying networks, and manually assembling them. Now they get this pre-configured solution, and I think the estimates are is that category is now closing in on $4 billion, with VCE being by far the largest vendor of converged infrastructure. So a JV structure, you say, boy, JVs are hard to go get them to work, but this JV structure between VMware, Cisco, and EMC has knocked it out of the park, right, representing almost 50% of that converged infrastructure category that didn't exist before it started. Absolutely, foundational. And every other company, right, in the industry should look at that and say, wow, why couldn't we make that happen? right? And I've said that to a few of the other big companies with network storage products, etc. You should be embarrassed when they succeed, right? In that sense, because here it is, this ability to create this new category has been phenomenal. And as we look at that partnership, we expect to continue forward. They're continuing to grow very rapidly year on year. Praveen will give some update on that. And one of the questions we got in the face of our EVO announcement was, so what does EVO mean for VCE? Converged infrastructure, hyper-converged infrastructure? How do they work? And EVO Rail, as we said, this appliance sort of at the lower end of the marketplace, largely VCEV blocks at the higher end. So those are mostly complementary. And EVO Rack, right, this higher end rack scale solution that we clearly indicated that we expect VCE to be one of the partners for that effort as we bring that into the marketplace next year. So at the high end, they play a much bigger role. EVO Rack, we expect them to be a partnership. Now, the last piece of your question sort of implies, well, what about Cisco? And in it, right, we have the partnership. It continues to go well. It's producing good revenue and good growth for all of the companies, EMC, VMware, and Cisco involved. But when we acquired Nicira, we launched our strategy in NSX, John Chambers and the Cisco folks, they said, wait a minute. The leader in networking, we should be the leader in virtual networking. And we, the leader in virtualization, said, we're going to be the leader in virtual networking. Both of those are very legitimate strategies. Us saying we're going to extend in the network, them saying they're going to extend. Both seem very rational, don't they? The only problem is they conflict. Right? Because not both of us can end up being the leader in virtualization of the network. And that's a point of conflict between us. And we'll see how that plays out in the marketplace. It's actually turned out to be a nice, good, competitive little battle of co-opetition in the industry, or frenemies as it's called. And we expect we're going to work that out. Cisco's partnership, we have many areas, and we're working with them on our DAS, our desktop as a service. We're working with them on VCE. In fact, the highest attach rate of any of the server vendors is with Cisco UCS and the VMware stack. So we have many areas of cooperation. We have an area of conflict, an important one for both of us, and we'll see how it works out in the industry over time. And as I've said before, we love Cisco gear, right? NSX works just great on Cisco gear, right, today and into the future.
Just on that note, one of the themes that I probably didn't mention earlier, and we love you for that. You're always very straightforward and head-on these topics, and it's always fun to talk to you. Is obviously competition makes us better. You should not make us bitter, right?
That's right.
With an E is better than an I right there. So on that note, in the room, as I talked about earlier, we have also a lot of private equity firms, VC firms. I introduced Raymond from West Summit Capital right here somewhere. And they have a lot of startup companies. And you are a great acquirer. You've done phenomenal acquisitions in the last few years. The last, obviously, AirWatch on the mobile space, that was a billion and a half. And we're hearing it's going very well. We used to be partners with Alan and John Marshall.
I told my wife I went shopping that day. She said, "What'd you buy?" I said, "A company." "How much?" $1.5 billion. Right, and her eyes lit up.
I'm going to go get those Louboutins now. Nice one. I know the brand, girl. So on that note, very quick, what do you suggest to the VCs and startup companies? There are about 50 CEOs on some of the hottest startup companies in Silicon Valley, in the world, pretty much here. What do you suggest to them when they're working with a company like VMware? Partnerships, M&A, exits, IPOs. What are the advice? What type of advice do you give to them?
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, we've been very clear on the areas that we're working in, SDDC, hybrid cloud, and user computing. Those are the areas we're absolutely looking for things that fit into those strategies that we can do. So we're absolutely interested in talking. We want to cast a wide net into the industry to explore those opportunities. We want to build relationships, invest with you in some of those companies to build partnerships so we get to know the people. Because, even more important than the technology at the end of the day to make any acquisition successful is the people. Right, and making sure the relationships are right, and we've built the the right cultural connection between the companies. And maybe my last piece of advice for you is don't be so insane with your valuation expectations.
So true. You're one of them, unfortunately. That was a good one. All right. So a lot of people asked me right before we started, and also yesterday, first of all, they love this open format, but they want to know more about you personally as well. So you told me any question goes. We didn't rehearse this, very open. A few personal questions.
Sure.
And they are kind of lightning round. Favorite book of all times?
Favorite book? Well, the Bible.
Very good.
Okay.
Favorite mentor of all times for you?
Andy Grove.
I was expecting that.
Yeah, 25-year plus mentor relationship with him. And mentoring with Andy Grove was like going to the dentist and not having Novocaine.
I'll tell you, I was working with a couple of Intel folks. They go, if you showed up at 9:01 a.m. at work.
No, 8:01.
8:01, sorry. Yeah. I thought it was 9. Maybe it was Central Time. I'm not sure.
8:05, the late list kicked in.
And then they should not come to the office, I heard.
Yeah, yeah. Don't show up until 9 o'clock when the late list went out. So,
I think the entire Nextenda team is fired. Anyway, favorite device you use on a daily basis that you love?
Oh, my iPhone.
Same,
my Mac,
great.
My
Fantastic.
iPad, right? Right after Intel won the Mac business, right? I no longer had a religious aversion to Apple devices, so I converted whole scale. So I'm a now religious Apple user, right? At the time, no, not that I have that Intel religion anymore, but at the time, boy, in fact, one guy walked into a meeting once before Apple had started to use, Intel processors with a Mac into the meeting. Right, and everybody just drops silent, right? And I walk over to the guy, I picked up his Mac, I walked over to the door in the conference room, and I threw it out. Closed the door, came walking back in. Not a word was said, but I tell you, a message was sent, right?
These are the times before the open.
Before they were, on the
now
right
we're
side.
end. So on that note, by the way, let's do maybe take a question because time is running out. Right there. Can you introduce your name, introduce yourself, the company, and location, please?
Yeah, Alberto Ibis from Fighting Capital. Thanks for this forum. Pat, a question for you. This week we got again yet another news about banks being compromised by Russian cyber attacks, and we're moving into a new world. A lot of electronic shifts. We have the cloud, virtualization, mobility, social. What are you doing with respect to security? I think we're in the early days, and I've seen some of the moves you've made. But is there any insight that you can share with us about what do you think VMware's role is going to be with respect to building a much more secure infrastructure?
Let me give you a quick background. Alberto Yepes, dear friend, ex-CEO of Entrust Technologies, manages a lot of security companies, so you know the path.
Yeah, yeah, and we, for instance, in my keynote this week, I talked about what I called I used the analogy of a hard-boiled egg, right? Hard and brittle on the outside and soft and gooey in the middle. And that's largely what our data centers look like today. Right, we've built up IDPs and firewalls and a set of services around the edge, but what's happened is when the bad guys get in, they have free lateral reign across the data center to drop APTs, beacons, and other things like that, right, which they essentially are mounting, an exfiltration from the inside. Right, that occurs. And essentially, all of our edge-based perimeter technologies need to be decomposed to become distributed technologies from within the data center. And obviously, some of our announcements around NSX and what we call microsegmentation, right, is starting to create those environments where you start building, right, separation and isolation zones from within, not just on the edge anymore. And I think this is a fundamental, rethinking of how security is done, right? It's one of the things that the software-defined data center enables, because you're no longer binding these capabilities to physical resources, which are expensive, hard to manage, and cannot be placed at the logical boundaries of all the services. When you move them into the virtual domain, they actually become agile, movable, policy-based, and you can put them all over the place. And that's sort of the basic idea of microsegmentation. And that certainly doesn't solve all the problems, by no means, right? It always is an arms race between the good guys and the bad guys. That will go on forever and ever, right? Technology is neutral. Good uses, bad uses, so you always have to stay in that technical race. But we think this is the most fundamental architectural shift in attacking security problems over the last couple decades.
This is fun. I don't want this to finish, but obviously time is tight. One last question. Is there a favorite quote you use for your kids, for your family, at work that you like? A favorite quote, a quote you mentioned, a quote that you like to repeat to prove a point. If you don't give me an answer, I'm going to ask Carl later on.
Yeah, yeah. I got lots of, in fact, I'm working on a book in my spare time, a management book.
Okay.
Right? And so I have these little one-liners of my favorite management kind of sayings, right? Of it, right? And those kind of things. So I could probably give you 20 of them right now, but let me just pick one off the top of my head. For managers, never waste a good crisis.
Fantastic.
right? Because the idea is that, it is terribly hard to move an organization. In a successful organization, it's near impossible to move an organization. So a crisis emerges. You as a manager have this enormous opportunity to take that crisis and move the organization in the strategic direction that you want it to be. So you want to embrace it. It's like a crisis. Yes! Right? You'll embrace it to drive the changes that you think fundamentally are required to get you on the right path. And then maybe the corollary of that is every once in a while you have to create a crisis just if you can't find one to use.
No, that's fantastic. Awesome job. Thank you so much.